chambers in Kilcraig. I'll wait for members of the public to get settled. Right. As this is a public meeting, I will need to read the protocol for the meetings, which is as follows. All visitors must sign into the visitor book at the entrance to Kilcraigs. This includes council staff from any other buildings. There is no planned fire evacuation drill or alarm test today, so if the fire alarm is activated during your visit, you must exit the building immediately. The council officers will direct you to the nearest fire exit and will escort visitors to the building fire assembly point beside the Silver Man at the top of Parliament Walk. Kilcraig staff should report to their floor's assembly point. You should remain at your assembly point until directed to reoccupy the building and only re-enter once the fire marshal has advised it is safe to do so. Please do not attempt to leave the site by vehicle until cleared to do so by the fire marshal to ensure that access routes are kept clear for emergency vehicles. Please note that this is a public meeting and that members of the public are in attendance. The meeting will also be recorded by the clerk and published online for public viewing after the meeting. Otherwise, the taking of photographs, including screenshots, audio or video recordings, are not permitted during the meeting unless with the express permission of the chair. Can members attending virtually activate their cameras where possible to enable you to join by video? And can all attendees mute their microphones when not speaking? Please do not come in unless I invite you to do so. If members attending virtually wish to speak on any point, please indicate by clicking on the raise your hand button. And members in the chamber should also raise their hands, and I will bring you in at an appropriate time. If members have not been able to access all papers for the meeting, please indicate now. No such indication. I will now ask the clerk to confirm attendance at this planning committee and would ask that members indicate if they wish to declare an interest.
We have apologies from Councillor Quinn, Councillor McCluskey and Councillor Keogh.
Thank you. Right, we move to
and members that wish to declare an interest.
Thanks. Can I declare an interest in paper or item 5? Just I've had quite a lot of communication with that, and so I've decided that I think just for public interest so I've decided to step back from that paper.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll recuse you from, or you recuse yourself from paper 5. That's fine. Okay, we've done 1 and 2. Now, item 3, which is the minutes of the planning committee held on the 30th of April this year. These are in your paper, so we'll just do the usual flick through on the basis of the pages involved, which are starting at page 5. Please indicate any alterations or omissions, and page 6. Right, with no objections, no changes, so the minutes are accepted. We now move to item 4, which is the application for a full planning permission to change the use of a dance studio to a hot food takeaway with the installation of a flue at 97E Main Street, Sopping. This report will be given to us by Mark Stoddart. By Jacob.
Good morning, Chair. So I'll be presenting on behalf of Mark Stoddart, who's not here today. The proposal here seeks planning permission for a change of use of a property on the main street in Socket, and its most recent use was a dance studio. It's currently vacant, and the change is to a hot food takeaway. Takeaways do not fall within any standard use class, therefore the planning permission is always required. So the property is in a town centre location, and the building is currently vacant, and both local and national policies support the use of buildings, and in this context it appears to be a compatible use. Although there has been an objection, a number of objections against the use from the local community, there are policy reasons to support, as is suggested in the paper. We felt the application should be decided by the committee, given that almost 200 names were put to an objection. And there are strong feelings that objectors had expressed. There are no concerns raised by our roads team, and environmental health did raise some concerns in relation to the details, but not the principle. And having further discussion with environmental health, these are not insurmountable. So given the distances from residential properties, the close proximity of other hot food takeaway uses and the ability to apply conditions, it's considered that all of the points raised can be covered off by conditions in Appendix 1. Maybe a slide behind, so that's the road. The impacts visually are likely to be the same as those next door, and there has been an access arrangements at the rear, and parking can either be to the rear or on the street at the front. It's also in a location where people could walk to it, and a delivery service might also reduce parking demand in the local area. That's another photo of the back there. So in terms of the vitality and viability of the street, we are only assessing a hot food takeaway here, not the type of takeaway. It could sell any type of food, and this will be dependent on the business owner and market forces to choose what they want to sell. Although there are others in the street, which is a main reason for the objection, there's also a mix of typical town centre uses. So there's chemists, convenience stores, office and some retail. And planning should only really intervene if there is an over-concentration of one particular use, and it can be demonstrated that that use is harmful. So balance and judgment should be applied, and in our professional opinion, it is not the case here that we should be recommending a refusal. That's the layout that is shown on screen. In terms of the layout, we're not overly concerned because that could be altered. It doesn't require planning permission to change the arrangement there. And externally, as you can see there, there's no changes to the front of the building. So overall, for the reasons given in the report of handling and the context and location, we recommend that the application is approved. Fundamentally, there is a condition in there for the ventilation and extraction system, and that would need to go back through environmental health. Thank you.
Okay, I will open up to members for questions. Councillor McTaggart.
Thanks, convener. I know there was a number of objections. There was actually petitions in shops about this potential change of use. My question is around the condition for ventilation and extraction. The system is suggested. So who determines whether that's necessary? Because I would imagine that other takeaways in the area have extraction systems so that it doesn't negatively impact the residential area surrounding this.
Yes, Councillor. So we suggest a condition to you. So it's part of that report. So if you accept the report, you'd be accepting that condition. In terms of the ventilation, that depends on what takeaway goes in. So that could be different. For example, fish and chip shop is very different to a Chinese takeaway. And they would have to put details into us, and then we would assess those details. So ordinarily, that would be a ventilation engineer that would put that into us, and then we'd assess it with the help of environmental health.
Right, so sorry, there will be further actions by us following this.
Yeah, in terms of the ventilation system and extraction, yeah, it will be.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to point out that there's a backstop to this in the sense that the fuel system is a requirement under the planning application here, but also that further action could be taken by environmental health if the fuel system was not functioning or being used properly. So there's another level of protection it's not a planning consideration, but would be a defence or a course of action for any objections on the from a point of view of the aromas and things coming up. But,
Well, like aromas, I like that.
Councillor Long.
Can I ask, does Scottish Water get notified of these ones? I'm just thinking of the drainage because just been aware in the last few months in regards to drainage issues that can happen due to takeaways, due to grease and fat. So I know that fat traps, I think, are suggested. I just wondered if we could put something in the condition to make that they have to have a fat trap put in there. Or I think it's called a fat trap or an oil trap, and so to prevent anything kind of getting into the drains and kind of blocking them up. I just wondered if there's anything that could cover that.
So, Scottish Water aren't consulted, they're not a statutory consultee here. I think the condition should cover that concern, but it would fall back to the owner and the operator to make sure that those are working properly. There's obviously enforcement powers that could be taken by various parties if it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. So if it's impacting on water, Scottish Water might be able to get involved. If it's impacting on neighbours, for example, it's going to be becoming nuisance, then environmental health could get involved at that point.
I have experience, that's all. It's a very difficult process. My other question is just over the balance and use that you were talking about, because I mean, I know that we find this when we're dealing with the licensing board, when you're looking at different kind of licensing venues, that you now have so many kind of delivery services. So I think it's really hard to know whether a place is oversaturated with the same business, because an area might not have a takeaway right there on their doorstep. However, you could easily be using the whole area could be using one that's 10 miles away due to that delivery. So yeah, it was just one of that kind of question. I suppose that balance of use is really difficult now to kind of put down that it's oversaturated because it's so hard to quantify now. Would that be kind of correct? Or do you agree?
So a healthy town street should have a balance and a mixture of uses. My experience where that's become a problem is you've got an entire street of one particular use, and then you have to tie it back to a harm as well. So you have to say why that use is harmful. So, for example, if you've got a street full of shops, you could have different types of shops, so it's not necessarily harmful. Hot food takeaway as well, you could have different types of hot food takeaway. So you'd have to say that it is harmful. But what I would say here is you need to come back to the history. So there has been an approval previously for hot food takeaway on this site. It's currently a vacant unit. It is in a town centre location where you would encourage this type of use. So that is where that is what tips the balance really, is appropriate location, the fact that it's vacant and doesn't have a current use in terms of being open, and then that experience. So like I said, my experience is it'd have to be a particular use all across that street rather than just a couple of uses that are similar.
And we can't, so pretty much, we can't really dictate what kind of shop there is, because I've seen ones about, oh, there's a shoe shop, but that's not the right type of shoe shop that people wanted. They wanted a different brand, but we've got no powers to really enforce that, apart from when it is that kind of, you know, if there was the exact same shop on kind of both sides of the street.
So we look at it on a strategic context. So we're looking at it in terms of use class. So when we look at this application here, it's a hot food takeaway, but it could be any type of hot food takeaway, and it could also change as well. So without planning permission. So if a business opens up there and, for example, it's not successful, somebody else might go into that unit and open up a different type of hot food takeaway business. So we're not assessing the type of hot food takeaway here. We're just looking at the principle and the detail of a hot food takeaway.
So just to sort of recap on that, there isn't a point at which planning gets concerned about the concentration of one particular kind of outlet in a given area. That's not planning consideration, or is there a trigger point where saturation actually is a thing?
So vitality and viability are planning considerations, but there isn't a set number that there has to be in a certain area. You would have to tie it back to a harm, and we haven't found a harm here in terms of allowing this use, and there seems to be more reasons to approve than there is to refuse.
Okay, thanks. Any more questions from councillors? Councillor Balsillie.
Hi, Jacob. I'm concerned about how waste is handled in hot food establishments. It's one of the key issues quite often that comes up as a council in terms of how waste is handled. And you, in your report, have stated that you feel that the waste facilities are adequate as how they've been presented in the plans, but our own environmental health have suggested that that be covered by a condition. But you haven't included that in the condition. I was just wondering why not? Would it not be worthwhile putting some safeguarding conditions in the handling of waste and its storage?
So the reason we didn't include that as a condition is because those areas that waste is stored is outside of the red line boundary. So we don't feel that we could enforce against it. So, but environmental health would have different powers if waste became a problem. So it's to prevent duplicate, and some of environmental health's response there were particularly about issues that they would deal with. It depends if you wanted to amend or add in a condition, we could pass that back to the chair.
Chair, I believe a lot in buttressing and not relying necessarily on other services, although I absolutely taken both the point that Jacob is raising about the enforceability of conditions if you can't control that. But I do think we should try to strive to condition the provision of appropriate waste storage within the application. I would acknowledge that in most of the cases that I've dealt with, it's ended up being how the hot food outlet has actually handled the waste in our operation. But I do think it's important that we have appropriate storage and ideally covered storage when we're dealing with food, because it can be very unsightly and smell a lot. And we've got residential properties either side. So there's a visual aspect, a health aspect, and a kind of smell aspect that I feel I'd like to see a policy, a condition in there to ensure that those aspects are covered.
Can I ask for a comment then on what additional protection we would get from a condition that we do not have under existing controls, i.e. environmental health?
So we could put in a requirement for them to give us a strategy for how they will deal with the waste. That's probably the safest option. I don't believe that we can lawfully condition anything that's outside of the red line boundary, but we could apply a condition for them to tell us how they intend to deal with that waste. Obviously, we're not at the point of a motion yet, so we'll think about that and come back to you in terms of wording, if that's okay.
But that would merely be requiring them to supply a written strategy. There would be no actual activity coming from other than writing a strategy, and that would meet the condition.
So we could I'd have to have a little think about it for the next 5 minutes or so, but yeah, we could get them to write the strategy and approve the strategy, and then look at, you know, that they have to impose that strategy, you know, furthermore or something like that. So they then need to follow that strategy by condition, unless otherwise approved by the planning authority, because we've got to be mindful that the use might the use might not change. So the user might change, or the person that is operating this might change, and they might not want to abide by that same strategy. So we've got to give them enough flexibility to be able to change that. Say, you know, if the bin arrangements needs to change, or the extractor arrangement needs to change, just giving them the flexibility there.
My concern, sorry, Councillor, I'll come back to that, and I see Councillor L's waiting as well. But my concern is that if we put in a condition about writing a strategy, that's a one-off event. They write the strategy, and that's the end of the responsibility, really, as far as planning is concerned. Because if they don't carry out the strategy, there's no recourse under planning. That would go straight back to environmental health, would it not?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. So there are other powers that the council can deal with issues such as waste under. But I think what Councillor Balsillie is suggesting is a trigger or a safeguard to bring it to their attention, and then if it needs to be picked up by a second party, then we'll go from there. But yes, there might only be so much that planning can do in terms of that operation and the management of that business. We're not the business people, but a condition might help later down the line.
Just for clarity, my point is 2 points. One, that we secure on the plan that the areas indicated for refuge storage is indeed for refuge storage, because I've seen items where bin stores have been turned into stores and the bins have been then offset into the public domain, if you like. And the second, yes, is an operational sort of vehicles that our environmental health people can then use as an additional backstop in terms of how they reinforce or request enforcement.
What about the question of the
Just in terms of that third point, it's not actually shown as a bin store, it's just shown as an area that bins are going to be kept. So we're not expecting that to change. It's a very similar place to the hot food takeaway that's next door. And there does look to be sufficient space there for, you know, extra bins to be stored. So in terms of containing this the waste, it's all in the same place.
okay?
Yeah, that's okay. It's just on the basis of my experience, really, and a lot of it has been aggravated by having a lack of bin storage. But in this case, that I would acknowledge in the plan that is clearly an area allocated for waste. I'm just asking that we actually condition it as such, because I've then seen bin stores used, as I said, as storage space that then displaces the bins quite often out into the public street in terms of how a hot food operators, and I'm just trying to safeguard against that. I acknowledge you can never protect things infinitum, if you like, but I'd feel more comfortable in approving this application with that planning condition in place.
I'm reminded therefore to put forward a motion.
Yes,
Do you want to give that consideration, or do you want?
yeah, I'll give that consideration.
We're not finished yet. We're going to move now to Councillor Earl, who I think is next in the queue. Councillor Earl.
Yeah, thank you. I'm hearing everything that's going on about the environmental package on 3.6, but it does say that the environmental health will come forward with a plan to look at the acoustic specification, the carbon filter, extractor fans, and the rest. Have they come forward with anything yet?
No, they have not. So that's a requirement through a condition, Councillor.
So if that is a requirement of the condition, at that point, can we not say to them, by the way, we have experience, we have noticed experience, and we've seen applications going in that say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and to raise Donald's point, where he says they carried on there and they haven't done, and we've ended up with bins on it. So rather than raise a motion here today, can we not simply put it in as a condition for environmental health that says there must be adequate storage for the waste oils, etc.?
Yeah, we could potentially add a condition about waste if the committee felt so strongly about that. Yeah.
Well, I think it's obvious that the committee are feeling exactly that. So I'd be very surprised if a condition doesn't come forward. Thank you.
I understood everything Councillor Earl said. That's linking up with what Councillor Balsillie was coming forward. So there's perhaps a seconder for you, Councillor, if you want to think about it. Before we get to that, Councillor Benny, patiently waiting in the wings.
Thank you, Chair. It's one thing that I'm a bit wary about is the fact, okay, there's going to be two, one next to each other, and they'll be very good and everything like that. But then what happens with the fast food that's going out the door, and how long does it go before they go, well, at the paper, I'll just throw it to the side. We need to have availability within the main part of that the people aren't going to be suddenly walking along the street and there's all these papers, chips and stuff like that. So that would be a concern for me unless there was something that could be done about that. Thank you.
I'll let Jacob answer that, but maybe suggest that it's probably something that's beyond the control of the unit operators, and it would be the council's duty to ensure there were adequate litter bins for general purpose, I'm guessing. I'll let Jacob come back on that from a planning angle.
So my suggestion of a waste strategy might cover that. So not only the waste that's going out the back, but the waste that's potentially going out the front.
Yeah.
Whether or not we can enforce the outcome of that waste strategy, that probably is beyond planning. But if there's a strategy in place, how they intend to deal with waste going in and out, that might satisfy councillors today.
Could have then, what do you think, if we rolled all of these concerns up into one waste strategy, perhaps, which covers specifically the bins and the collateral damage to the environment?
Yeah, I think it could help. We might need to have a discussion more with lawyers that are here today.
Right, so we will at some point take a recess and discuss that. Okay, right, so no more questions from councillors. We have some members of the public who wish to come forward to speak, and I'm going to invite them now to do so. Before they do, I just want to make it clear that what we would like to hear from you is positive contribution on planning conditions only. We can only consider this application from a planning angle. There are other things that will come into it which are not our concern. So please, when you come up to speak, I'll give a maximum of 5 minutes per speaker, and I've got 6 mentioned here. And if you're coming up as a second or third member of the public, please don't just repeat what the person before you said. Add to that's been said. We'll get more value out of it then. I hope I'm not being offensive when I say that, but let's just keep it informative as far as we can. Not in any special order, well, the order which they're on the sheet in front of me. I'm going to ask Dominic Notarangelo to come up. He is the agent and will be speaking. Mark, will you explain the microphone and arrange something? Is that not working? Change it for another one.
So the guy will start from my leader. I will stand up and speak. Everyone can hear me.
Let's go from Benny. Would you switch it off? What now?
Sorry.
Right, 5 minutes.
Good morning, elected members, council officers, members of the public. My name is Dominic Notarangelo. I am the agent for this application. I have a history of designing food premises of 54 years. For 20 of those 54 years, I also operated hot food takeaway shops, so I'm highly experienced. The applicant in this application used to work for me as a manager of one of my shops in Glasgow. The owner of the premises, as stated on the application form, is one Alberto Iaconelli. That is not a type on my part. He will be known to a lot of the people around here as Alberto Giaconelli. Alberto opened the Bridge Fish and Chip Shop. He ran it for 25 years until he had a heart attack and then leased the premises out. In 2012, when the application site gained its original consent for hot food takeaway, Alberto decided to purchase the site and held on to it. It was operated by the dance studio, who moved out to larger premises along the road. It is true that the premises did have a previous consent for hot food takeaway. In fact, there is a ventilation canopy and flue right in the middle of the shop. I'm not sure whether or not the bakery installed that or whether the hot food takeaway operator that failed to open, whether they installed it. Now, Alberto, or anybody here that knows him, is quite a shrewd business operator. He would not put his tenants at the other shop at the risk of not being able to pay their rent to him. It wouldn't be in his best interest. He ran the shop for 25 years. He knows the potential of the area. I also happen to know a number of other people involved in that. I know the tenant and I know the subtenant. The subtenant has recently purchased a shop that I used to operate in the village of Bishopton, close to Glasgow Airport, where they now operate both fish and chip shops in a village which has got a population a bit lower than the population is out here. So there is room for a second hot food takeaway. I do know and I understand that everyone who's signed up to the petition for the bridge are loyal customers of the bridge. Competition raises standards. Competition keeps prices down. Alberto is confident as a landlord that both operations would thrive in this area and that his ability to collect rent would not be impaired. If anyone's got any questions, on the ventilation, what I will say is when I read the comments from Environmental Health Online, I immediately reached out to Environmental Health for a conversation. They didn't respond to me. This is not intended as a criticism. All council departments are busy, and I reckon that Environmental Health just simply took the view that the time to sit down and spend time in a conversation would be just any consent that may be granted.
So that's all you want to say to the stone. Thanks very much. Any questions on this? Did everyone want to interrogate?
No, I suppose just a very quick question on my waste question. I was wondering if you could help us in terms of outlining what the proposed bin storage is and how waste would be handled, and whether you would be comfortable with a condition that basically regulates that.
I would be averse to such a condition. Obviously, every local area has got its own bin arrangements. This particular shop is actually 3 times the size of the shop that this chap used to manage for me in Glasgow. So, obviously, these days, the various waste types are separated out, including food waste. And if the local authority doesn't have arrangements, the applicant will contract with a licensed commercial operator. But having rubbish around your hot food takeaway isn't a good look.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a contribution from Dominic. I'm going to ask Maya Reid. Morning, Maya. I don't expect you to have the skills in planning, but try to look at this from a planning angle. Carry on, 5 minutes. Press a little button, contribute, mark this. Thanks.
Thank you. Hello, my name's Maya Reid and I work in the community and for food businesses. It was myself that put out the petition from the public. So as far as I know, I've been nominated to speak on their behalf. Some of the points that the planning committee had mentioned was that the police, if there was any problems with loitering or people hanging about that shouldn't be, that could be reported to the police. But in my opinion, as a planning committee, it's your job to foresee and hopefully prevent things from going that far in the county. And as Alberto's, the man that spoke before me, had mentioned that he feels competition in the community, the lease terms of the bridge are that Alberto must sell within 4 years. So potentially there is a bit of malicious there on creating another business that would potentially mean they wouldn't sell. We wouldn't be interested in buying. I've also got a wee image here for anybody that would like to see that shows the parking available outside the premises and the double yellow line restrictions across the road. So from these images, you can see there's roughly about 7 parking spaces, which if you put in another late night business with delivery drivers, customers, along with the other premises, would potentially cause excessive parking, parking double yellow lines, creating an unsafe environment for pedestrians, and illegal parking that could cause road traffic accidents, and just a general unsafety for the road outside. This just shows the over-concentration currently between the hot food businesses. So between the current selection of cuisines, you have the Pecking Inn and Panda House, both Chinese cuisines. That's a 2-minute walk from each other. You've got the Bridge and Tartantica, they both provide fish and chips. That's currently a 10-minute walk. If you add in the approval for the new hot food takeaway, you would create a 4-minute walk between them. You've got Royal Tandoori and Tartantica again, that both provide Indian cuisine. They are a 6-minute walk from each other, and that doesn't include dessert shops, breakfast or lunch diners, or pubs that currently provide food. So it's not necessarily that the community feel another takeaway, but it would just be, the takeaway is not the problem, it's the current volume already. And obviously, as it had previously been used as a recreational facility, putting planning approval in for that would make it much harder in the future for it to be used as a recreational space again. And I think that's me.
Okay, thanks, Maya. Jacob, you want to comment on the parking as a planning consideration? Take that first.
So parking is considered in the report, and we did consult with our roads colleagues who didn't raise an objection, but it is in what we would term as sustainable location. So you wouldn't necessarily need to drive to this. You could walk. Some people might catch the bus. I doubt there's very many people do that, but there's lots of different methods of getting to these premises. When you visit a hot food takeaway, it is meant to be fast food, so you are in and out. So that reduces the requirement for spaces. I think that's probably all I can say on parking, but it is considered in the report, and that there aren't considered by the rules team to be any concerns.
I think we've also dealt with the concentration in an earlier conversation, and I wasn't sure quite what the first point that Maya was making, what the relevance of that was to this. Come back to you in a second. So it didn't sound to me as if it had any planning aspects to it all that part. But I noticed we could flag up Councillor Earl, so I'll bring them in, and then Councillor Law. Councillor Earl.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can you tell me, it's a question for either Jacob or legal, is competition a planning issue?
So competition is not necessarily, it is not a planning issue. Competition between businesses is dependent on market forces. It's only when it becomes a problem and we're looking at vitality and viability. So the fact that there's a number of businesses that are competing against each other, that's out with planning's control. It shouldn't be within our planning considerations. But if there was lots of a particular use and it was causing a harm, strategically we would have to look at that. So to come back to your original question, competition, no, is not a planning consideration.
Thank you.
There's a lot.
Just on the last point, that obviously planning applications just now to change the change of use, that won't affect in future another change of use. It doesn't impact that, because obviously the building's shown that it's viable for a use of recreation. So say this one is granted in a few years' time, somebody else takes over it, decides to change it, that would then just come back to planning and there'd be another change of use. There wouldn't be anything that would then go negatively against that.
No, so it'd be assessed against the planning policies at that time. And as you know, uses within town centres change all the time. So yeah, it could be hot food takeaway today, and then there might be another application coming tomorrow. We can't see the future, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks. Next we've got Michael Gillespie. Is that right? Very good. Maybe he's not here. Sina Solati? No. And finally, Marcel Levinsky. Someone's online. You are Michael, are you? You're Michael. Marcel. Oh, Marcel. Sorry. I mean, it's Sina's online, so we'll bring her in after you, Marcel. Bear in mind what's been said before doesn't need to be said again. If you can add anything to the information available to councillors to make the decision easier or accurate, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
So I agree with a lot of the points that Maya says. Obviously, there's no point in repeating the same thing. I think earlier on we mentioned about the radius. So obviously we were talking about, Maya was saying that was the radius of 0.2 miles. I think earlier on we were speaking about a 10-mile radius. So if you were looking at that, obviously there's an abundance of hot food takeaways in a 10-mile radius rather than a 0.2. I think that's the one thing I would add in, but everything else that Maya had said that I would back as well.
We have a concern that it's difficult to decide what over-concentration becomes harmful to the area. It's not necessarily harmful to individual businesses. And Jacob will correct me if I'm wrong in saying this. It's more about the impact on the environment, where perhaps if you have too many of something, the standards were falling down because businesses were failing. That might be a trigger point, but I'm guessing in normal competition isn't something that planning concerns itself with. Planning law, I mean, I don't want to plan it. Planning law doesn't concern itself with simple business competition. You could want to add anything to that?
No, maybe just that a good business will attract people. So that should hopefully help anxieties there, but planning can't really get involved in competition, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks.
Sounds good.
Now, Sina, if you can unmute.
Hello there. Can you hear me? Hello.
We can hear you sort of.
I can't hear you properly. I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Can anyone understand?
Yeah.
I can't interpret.
Yeah.
Okay,
I
as long
can
as
certainly hear
someone-
him.
Well, can I speak now?
Okay,
Well,
now,
my-
Sina, and we're listening.
My concern is not about food businesses in general. The area already has several takeaway premises. Adding another late night takeaway is likely to increase loitering, littering, and traffic and parking pressures. This could create safety concerns for pedestrians and residents. I'm also concerned that approving this application would permanently remove the opportunity for the premises to be used for community or recreational purposes in the future. I therefore ask the committee to consider the hello. To consider the cumulative impact on the local area before approving this application. I don't know, did you hear me or not?
Right, thank you. I think your contribution has come through and it's been heard by the committee. Does anyone want to summarise any new information that I didn't catch any of that? Was there?
No, that was same as what's said for that. Just reiterating what we've already heard.
Okay, thank you, Sina, for your contribution. We will now move on to the next stage. Any further questions from members or anyone here present? Not done that. No, no, so not here, anyone, unfortunately, online. Okay, so let's next stage then is to propose the paper. Oh, well, no, we've got to deal with the question of amendedness.
I'll send you some words.
Right, we're going to adjourn the meeting for 5 minutes while the amendment proposed by Councillor Balsillie is worded. That will then be proposed, seconded and debated. Take 5 minutes, folks. Once you go into the office office. Yeah.
Sorry? Yeah, I think it's going to be common. No. Okay, even me.
Yes.